Hash part one winter in Dry Creek. The wind howled through Dry Creek like a wounded animal, carrying ice crystals that bit at any exposed flesh. Sawyer Reed pulled his coat collar higher against his weathered jaw and guided his horse down the main street. The town looked half dead under its blanket of snow. Storefronts dark except for the bakery where Mrs. Henderson kept her ovens burning through the coldest nights. He hadn't planned on coming to town for another week, but the coffee had run out, and a man could only drink melted snow for so long before his soul started to protest. The general store stood at the corner, its windows fogged with warmth. Sawyer tied his horse to the post and stamped his boots on the boards, shaking off the accumulated snow. "That you, Reed?" Old Pete called from behind the counter. "Thought you'd frozen solid up on that ridge of yours." "Not yet." Sawyer's voice came out rough from disuse. Living alone did that to a man, made his throat forget the shape of words. He moved through the store with practiced efficiency, gathering coffee, flour, salt. His hands paused over a jar of honey, remembering how his mother used to drizzle it over cornbread on Sunday mornings. That was before the war, before everything changed. He left the honey on the shelf. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the store windows. Sawyer paid his bill in silence and loaded his saddlebags. The bakery next door exhaled the scent of fresh bread, and his stomach reminded him that jerky and hardtack made for poor company. He'd buy one loaf, maybe two if Mrs. Henderson was in a talking mood and he could escape quick enough. The bell above the bakery door chimed as he entered. Warmth hit him like a wall, carrying the blessed smell of yeast and flour. Mrs. Henderson stood behind the counter, her gray hair pinned severely back, her hands dusted white. "Mr. Reed." She nodded, already reaching for the sourdough he favored. "Haven't seen you since before Thanksgiving." "Been busy." He pulled out his money, eager to complete the transaction. That's when he saw her. She huddled near the back door, pressed against the wall like she was trying to become part of the wood. Her dress, what had once been a wedding dress, he realized with a start, hung in tatters, the white silk gone gray with dirt and wear. Ice crystals clung to her dark hair, but it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They held the look of a hunted animal, desperate and calculating at once. "Mrs. Henderson followed his gaze, and her lips pursed. "Don't mind her. She's been haunting the alley for 2 days now, looking for scraps. I told her to move along, but—" "She hungry?" The question came out before Sawyer could stop it. "I imagine so, but that's not our concern. Mr. Reed. That's Margot Lair, the runaway bride from Cheyenne. They say she stole her wedding jewels and fled in the night. There's even a reward posted." Sawyer looked at the woman again. She'd drawn further into herself at the mention of her name, arms wrapped around her middle. Her lips were blue with cold. "How much for another loaf?" he asked quietly. "Mr. Reed, you don't want to get involved with—" "How much?" Mrs. Henderson's mouth tightened, but she named her price. Sawyer laid the coins on the counter and pointed to a fresh loaf, still warm from the oven. "That one." He took both loaves and walked slowly toward the back of the store. The woman Margot watched him approach like a deer watching a wolf. When he was still several feet away, he stopped and set one loaf on a nearby crate. "A lady should never have to beg for bread," he said, keeping his voice low and steady, the way he'd talk to a spooked horse. She stared at the bread, then at him, suspicion warring with hunger in her eyes. "What's your price?" "No price, just bread." Her hand darted out, quick as a bird, snatching the loaf. She pressed it against her chest and backed toward the door. Sawyer reached into his pocket slowly, pulled out a folded bandana and his small knife. He set them on the crate where the bread had been. "The knife's sharp enough for cutting food or other things, if need be. The cloth's clean." "Why?" The word came out cracked and harsh. "Because winter's no time to be alone and hungry." He turned to leave, then paused. "There's a barn at the Murphy place, quarter-mile south. They're gone for the winter, but the barn's still standing, warmer than an alley." He left before she could respond, before Mrs. Henderson could voice the protest forming on her lips. Outside, the cold hit him again, but it felt cleaner somehow than the judgment inside the bakery. The saloon across the street had already started its evening business. Sawyer caught sight of Jake Morrison, the stable hand, leading a string of horses toward the livery. The boy waved, and Sawyer returned it with a nod. "Hey, Mr. Reed," Jake called out. "That your bay mare tied up at Henderson's? She's looking a bit thin." "She's managing." Sawyer checked his saddle cinch. "Been a hard winter for everyone." "Tell me about it, mister. Garrett says if this cold keeps up, we'll lose half the herd come spring." Jake's eyes drifted toward the bakery. "You see that woman in there? The one they're all talking about?" "Saw her." Mister, Garrett says Lucas Averill himself is coming to fetch her back. Says she stole near 10,000 in jewels. Can you imagine?" Sawyer could imagine a lot of things. He'd seen enough in his 34 years to know that truth had a way of bending under the weight of money and influence. "You believe everything Garrett tells you?" Jake flushed. "Well, no, but then maybe save your judgment till you know the facts." Sawyer swung up into his saddle. The bay mare shifted under him. Eager to be moving. "Are you heading back up the ridge?" Jake asked. "That's the plan. In this weather, sun'll be down in 2 hours. I know my way." He turned the mare toward the edge of town, but something made him look back. The bakery door opened, and Margot Lair slipped out. The bread clutched to her chest, the bandana wrapped around her shoulders like the world's most inadequate shawl. She glanced both ways before hurrying down the alley, moving with the careful steps of someone who'd learned not to trust the ground beneath their feet. Sawyer waited until she disappeared before nudging his horse forward. He had supplies to pack in and animals to tend before nightfall. Whatever trouble followed Margot Lair was none of his concern. But as he rode toward the edge of town, he found himself thinking about the Murphy barn, wondering if she'd find it, wondering if she'd trust his word enough to seek shelter there. The wind picked up again, driving snow in horizontal sheets that stung his face. At the town limits, he paused. The smart thing would be to ride home, forget the haunted-eyed woman and whatever complications she carried. He'd built his life on staying clear of other people's troubles. The war had taught him that lesson well enough. Yet something nagged at him. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at that bread, like it was salvation itself. Maybe it was the memory of another time, another place, when he'd been the one needing kindness from strangers. Or maybe it was just that winter had a way of making a man think about what really mattered when the cold came calling. He turned his horse around. The Murphy barn sat dark against the snow, its doors hanging slightly askew. No tracks led to it yet. Sawyer dismounted and pushed inside, checking for hazards. The structure was sound enough, though dust motes danced in the fading light streaming through gaps in the walls. Hay still filled one corner, old but dry. He unsaddled his mare and rubbed her down, all the while listening. Town sounds carried on the wind, a dog barking, someone shouting, the distant tinkle of piano music from the saloon, but nothing closer. She appeared like a ghost just as he finished with the horse. One moment the doorway stood empty. The next she filled it, still clutching the bread, the knife now visible in her other hand. She'd torn a strip from a ruined dress to tie back her hair. "You came back," she said, accusation and wonder mixing in her voice. "Said I would." Men say a lot of things. True enough. He kept his movements slow and deliberate as he gathered his saddle. "Barn's yours if you want it. I'll be heading home now." "Wait!" The words shot out, sharp with desperation. "Is it true about Averill coming?" Sawyer studied her in the dim light. Up close, he could see the bruises on her wrists, fading to yellow-green, the kind of marks that came from hands gripping too tight. "That's what they're saying." She laughed, bitter and short. Of course he is. Lucas never could stand losing his possessions. You're not anybody's possession. Tell that to the law. She lowered the knife but didn't put it away. I suppose you want to know if I took them. The jewels. None of my business. They were my mother's. The words tumbled out fast, like she needed to tell someone. Anyone. Her pearl necklace, her sapphire ring, given to me before she died, long before I ever met Lucas Averill. But he claimed them as part of my dowry. Said they belonged to him now. When I ran, I took them. So yes, by his reckoning, I'm a thief. By his reckoning, Sawyer repeated. What about yours? By mine. She straightened. And for a moment he saw what she must have looked like before, proud, unbroken. By mine, I'm a woman who refused to be sold, who wouldn't stand by while he beat his servants for spilling soup, who couldn't smile and pretend while he... She stopped, swallowed hard. I'm many things, Mr. Reed, Sawyer Reed. I'm many things, Mr. Reed, but I'm not a thief. He believed her. Maybe that made him a fool. But he'd learned to read truth in people's eyes during the war, when lies could get you killed. There's a storm coming, he said instead of voicing his thoughts. A bad one, from the feel of it. This barn won't hold against what's building. I'll manage. Like you've been managing in that alley. Her jaw tightened. What do you suggest that I walk back to town and turn myself in? Let them ship me back to Lucas like a lost package. I'm suggesting, he said carefully, that my place has walls that don't let the wind through, and a stove that actually puts out heat. You could weather the storm there. Figure out your next move when you're not half frozen. And what would you want in return? The question hurt more than it should have, but he understood it. A woman in her position had probably heard too many offers that came with hidden costs. Nothing, same as the bread. He moved toward the door, then stopped. I've got a reputation in these parts. Miss Lair, I keep to myself, don't bother nobody, and expect the same in return. Last thing I want is complications, but I also know what it's like to need help and have nowhere to turn. You want to freeze in this barn, that's your choice. You want somewhere warm to think through your options. You follow my tracks before the snow covers them. He left her there, standing in the dim barn with her bread and her knife and her bruised wrists. The mare picked her way carefully through the deepening snow as they headed for the ridge trail. Behind them, Dry Creek's lights began to flicker on, one by one, like stars coming out. Sawyer didn't look back. Either she'd follow or she wouldn't. He'd made his offer. The rest was up to her. But as he climbed toward home, he found himself riding slower than usual, making sure his tracks stayed clear in the snow. And when he heard the soft footfalls behind him, careful and hesitant, he allowed himself one small smile that the wind quickly stole away. The storm hit just as they reached the tree line, but by then they were close enough to push through. And if Sawyer noticed the shadow that had been following them from town, watching from the edges of the light, he kept that observation to himself. Some troubles were best met when the sun came up again. For now, there was shelter to reach and a fire to build. Everything else could wait. Part 2, the trail to the high country. The storm hit them like a living thing, all teeth and fury. Snow drove sideways, finding every gap in their clothing, while the wind tried to tear them from their saddles. Sawyer had given Margot his spare horse, an old but steady paint mare who knew these trails better than most men. Keep your head down, he called over the howling wind. Trust the horse. She nodded, face pale but determined beneath the hat he'd insisted she wear. They'd barely spoken during the climb from town, each lost in their own thoughts and the business of staying upright. The trail narrowed as they climbed, winding between stands of pine that offered momentary shelter from the worst of the wind. In these brief respites, Sawyer glanced back to check on her. She rode like someone who'd learned young but hadn't been on a horse in years, competent but stiff, fighting the animal instead of working with it. "Ease up on the reins," he said during one sheltered moment. "She knows her job. Let her do it." "I'm perfectly capable of—" Margot's protest cut off as the mare stepped sideways to avoid an ice-covered rock, nearly unseating her. "I'm sure you are. But this isn't some city park bridle path. These horses have been navigating these trails longer than either of us. Trust goes both ways." She looked at him then. Really looked, and he saw something shift in her expression. "All right." She loosened her grip, and the mare immediately settled into a steadier gait. They pushed on. The trail grew steeper, more treacherous. Ice lurked beneath the fresh snow, making every step a calculated risk. Sawyer kept them to a careful pace, knowing that haste would only invite disaster. An hour into the climb, they reached Devil's Creek. Usually it ran low in winter, easy to ford. But something had dammed it upstream, probably ice and fallen trees, and now it rushed high and angry between its banks. Sawyer studied the crossing, calculating. The usual ford was underwater. They'd have to go upstream, find a narrower spot. "We stopping?" Margot's voice came out steady despite her obvious exhaustion. "Looking for a better crossing." He pointed upstream. "Current's too strong here." They picked their way along the bank, horses nervous at the sound of rushing water. Finally, Sawyer spotted what he was looking for, a place where boulders created a series of steps across the flow. "I'll go first," he said. "Watch where I put my horse. Follow exactly." "And if I fall?" "You won't." He met her eyes. "But if you do, let go of the reins. Get your feet out of the stirrups. The horse will make it across, and I'll come for you." Comforting. Despite everything, he almost smiled. "You want comfort or truth?" "Truth." No hesitation. Always truth. He guided his bay into the water. The mare snorted, protested, but responded to his firm guidance. The current tugged at them, trying to sweep horse and rider downstream. One careful step at a time, testing each foothold. They made their way across. On the far bank, he turned to watch Margot follow. She kept her eyes fixed on the opposite shore, face set with concentration. Halfway across, her mare stumbled. For a heart-stopping moment, horse and rider swayed. Then Margot shifted her weight, helping the animal recover its balance, and they completed the crossing. "Well done," Sawyer said as she reached him. "I've had practice with dangerous crossings." Something in her tone suggested she wasn't talking about rivers. They climbed away from the creek, up into thicker forest where the trees broke the worst of the wind. Snow still fell steadily, but here it drifted down almost gently, muffling the world in white silence. "How much farther?" Margot asked. 2 miles, maybe 3. She nodded, jaw set against complaint, but Sawyer could see her struggling. The cold was seeping in, stealing strength and will. He'd seen it before, that gradual surrender to the elements. "Tell me about the South," he said suddenly. She looked at him in surprise. "What?" "You're from somewhere warmer. Georgia, Carolina." "Virginia." Her voice carried a faint accent he'd noticed before. Softened vowels and gentled consonants. "Near Richmond." "Long way from home." "There is no home." The words came out flat. "Not anymore. War." "Among other things." She was quiet for a moment. "Then my father chose the wrong side in more ways than one. Backed the Confederacy with everything he had: money, influence, sons. Lost it all. The Yankees burned our fields, but it was the carpetbaggers who took everything else." "Your brothers?" "Dead, both of them. One at Antietam, one at Gettysburg." She paused. "You fought?" "Yeah." "Which side?" "Does it matter now?" She considered this. "No, I suppose it doesn't. We all lost something in that war." They rode in silence for a while, navigating a series of switchbacks. The horses labored now. breathing hard in the thin air. But they were close. Sawyer could smell smoke from his own chimney, carried on the wind. "Why Lucas Averill?" he asked eventually. "Man like that. Reputation for hardness. Why agree to marry him?" "Because a woman with nothing has few choices. Mr. Reed. And a woman whose family name is Mudd has even fewer." Her laugh held no humor. "Father made the arrangement before he died. One last business deal. Selling his daughter to cover his debts. Lucas got a bride with old bloodlines to polish his new money. I got survival. Or so I thought." "What changed?" She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. "Then I saw him strike a kitchen girl, 13 years old, maybe 14. She'd burned his eggs." Margot's hands tightened on the reins before she remembered and relaxed them. "The sound her head made hitting the wall. I'd heard that sound before. During the war. It's not a sound you forget." "No," Sawyer agreed quietly. "It's not." I tried to intervene. He backhanded me without even looking, like swatting a fly. Then he smiled and said I'd learn my place soon enough. She straightened in the saddle. That's when I knew I had to run, not just for myself, but because if I stayed, if I let him make me into what he wanted, I'd be no better than him, standing by while he hurt people who couldn't fight back. "So you took your mother's jewels and left?" "That very night. Climbed out a window in my wedding dress. The final fitting had been that afternoon. Ironic. Isn't it running away in the very symbol of my captivity?" She gestured at the ruined dress beneath her coat. "I've been running for 8 days now. Sold my mother's necklace for coach fare, kept moving west. Thought I'd lost him in Denver, but men like Averill don't like losing. Men like Averill don't know how to lose. There's a difference." The trees opened up ahead, revealing the small plateau where Sawyer had built his cabin. It sat solid against the hillside. Logs weathered gray but chinked tight against the wind. Smoke rose from the stone chimney, straight up in the still air. "It's not much," Sawyer said, suddenly seeing his home through strangers' eyes. "It's standing," Margot replied. "It's warm. Right now. That makes it paradise." He dismounted and helped her down, noting how her legs nearly buckled. Exhaustion and cold had taken their toll. "Get inside," he ordered. "I'll see to the horses." "I can help." "Inside, now. Fire needs tending anyway." She looked ready to argue, then thought better of it. He watched her make her way to the door, each step careful on the icy ground. Only when she was safely inside did he lead the horses to the small stable attached to the cabin's side. The animals were grateful for shelter, standing patient while he rubbed them down and forked hay into the manger. He took extra time, giving Margot space to adjust to the cabin, to warm up without him hovering. When he finally entered, he found her standing by the stove, hands extended toward its warmth. She'd removed her wet outer clothes, hanging them carefully on the hooks by the door. The ruined wedding dress looked even worse in the lamplight, torn, stained, a mockery of its original purpose. "There's coffee," she said without turning. "I made fresh." "Appreciated." He poured himself a cup, noting she'd found the supplies without difficulty. "Hungry?" "Starved, but I can cook if you show me where things are. I won't be a burden. Mr. Reed, I can work for my keep." Nobody said anything about keeping. He pulled down a pot, started assembling ingredients for stew. "You're here till the storm passes and you figure out your next move. That's all." "That's all?" she repeated, and something in her tone made him look up. She was watching him with those dark eyes, measuring, calculating. "You really don't want anything from me. I want you to stop looking at me like I'm about to turn into Lucas Averill." The words came out harsher than intended. He gentled his tone. "Look, Miss Lair, I've been living alone up here for near 3 years now. I like it that way. Last thing I want is complications or obligations. You needed help. I could give it, Come spring thaw, you'll move on to wherever you're going, and I'll go back to my peace and quiet. Simple as that. Nothing's ever that simple. Maybe not, but we can pretend for a few days. Can't we? She smiled then, just a little. I suppose we can, Mr. Reed. Sawyer, if we're sharing a roof, might as well use first names. Margot, then. She moved to the table, started cutting the vegetables he'd set out. And I can cook, learned during the war when all the house slaves, the servants left, had to feed whoever was left on whatever we could find. They worked in companionable silence, preparing the simple meal. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the cabin was warm, safe. Sawyer found himself relaxing muscles he hadn't realized were tense. As they ate, Margot asked about the homestead, how he'd built it, why he'd chosen this particular spot. Safe topics. He told her about finding the plateau by accident, chasing a wounded elk, how the southern exposure meant longer sunlight, and the hillside blocked the worst of the north wind. You built all this alone. Mostly. Jake Morrison helped with the heavy beams. Good kid. You met him today, the stable hand. The one who was talking about the reward? He's young. Repeats what he hears. Sawyer pushed back from the table. Speaking of which, we need to talk about what happens next. I keep running. No hesitation. West, maybe California, somewhere Lucas can't reach. He'll have men watching the trails. Railroad stations, too. Then I'll wait. Let him think I've gone to ground somewhere else. She met his eyes. Don't worry. I won't bring trouble to your door any longer than necessary. Wasn't worried about that. He was, but not in the way she thought. I was thinking more about practical matters. You'll need different clothes. For one thing, can't travel in a wedding dress, even a ruined one. I have no money left, spent the last on coach fare. I've got old clothes that might fit well enough. And come spring, there's work in the valley if you're willing. Ranchers always need help during calving season. You're very free with your assistance to a wanted woman. Alleged thief, he corrected. And I've found that wanted posters rarely tell the whole truth. Speaking from experience, he shrugged. War makes criminals of us all, one way or another. She absorbed this, then nodded. Well then, Sawyer Reed, it seems we understand each other. Outside, the wind howled its agreement, and somewhere in the darkness, wolves added their voices to the storm. But inside the cabin, two people who'd learned not to trust sat across from each other and began, carefully, to lower their guard. It was a start. Part 3, The House on the Wind. The days fell into a rhythm as natural as breathing. Sawyer would rise before dawn, stoking the fire and putting coffee on before heading out to tend the animals. By the time he returned, Margot would have breakfast ready, simple fare, but properly cooked. They ate in comfortable silence, then went about their separate tasks. She took to the homestead work without complaint. Washing clothes in the creek required breaking ice first, but she managed it, her hands red and raw from the cold water. When Sawyer showed her how to bank the fire to last through the night, she paid attention like her life depended on it, which, he supposed, it did. You don't have to prove anything, he told her one morning, finding her splitting kindling behind the cabin. The axe looked too heavy in her hands, but she'd managed a respectable pile. I'm not proving, I'm contributing. She set another piece on the stump, raised the axe. There's a difference. He watched her swing, noted the improvement in her form. Who taught you to split wood? My brother James, before he enlisted. The axe came down clean, splitting the pine with a satisfying crack. Said a lady should know how to keep herself warm without depending on anyone else. Smart man. He was. She set up another piece. 17 years old at Antietam. They sent his effects home in a flour sack. Sawyer took the axe from her gently. That's enough for today. Your hands are bleeding. She looked down, seemed surprised by the blood seeping through her blisters. I didn't notice. Come on, I'll show you how to make a poultice. Useful skill up here. In the cabin, he gathered yarrow and calendula from his medicinal stores, crushing them into a paste. Margot watched intently as he worked, asking questions about each herb, their properties and uses. You know a lot about healing, she observed as he wrapped her hands with clean cloth. Had to learn. Nearest doctors in Cheyenne. 2 days' ride when the weather's good. Man living alone needs to know how to patch himself up. Or woman, he agreed. That afternoon, while her hands healed, he taught her to shoot. She'd handled firearms before her brothers had seen to that, but hunting rifles were different from the gentleman's pistols she'd known. Steady, he murmured, standing behind her as she sighted down the barrel. Breathe out slow, squeeze on empty lungs. The rifle cracked, and the tin can he'd set up 50 yards away jumped off its perch. Good, again. She hit 4 out of 5 targets, then turned to him with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. James would be insufferable if he knew I'd become a marksman. Markswoman, Sawyer corrected. And this isn't about impressing anyone. It's about staying alive. Bears come down from the high country when they're hungry. Wolves, too. And sometimes it's men who are the danger. She handed him the rifle. I know, Sawyer. Why do you think I'm here? That evening, as they sat by the fire, she asked, Why do you live alone, really? He was quiet for a long time, considering how much truth to share. Got tired of people, he said finally. After the war, went back to Missouri. Found my family farm sold for taxes. Neighbors I'd known my whole life acting like strangers. Tried to make a go of it in town, but he shrugged. Some men are meant for crowds, others aren't. And women. Haven't known enough women to say... She laughed, soft and unexpected. Honest, at least... What about you after all this is over? What then? I used to think California. Start over where nobody knows the lair name. Where the war's just a distant story. She pulled her knees up, wrapped her arms around them. But now I wonder if running ever really ends. Maybe Lucas follows. Maybe he doesn't. But there'll always be another Lucas. Another man who thinks he can own what he wants. Not all men. I know. She looked at him. You're proof of that. But you're also hiding up here, away from the world. What does that say about the rest of them? He had no answer for that. 3 days later, the fever struck. Sawyer found her collapsed by the woodpile, skin burning hot despite the snow. He carried her inside, his heart hammering with a fear he didn't want to examine too closely. Just a cold, she mumbled as he laid her on the bed, his bed, the only one in the cabin. I'll be fine. But she wasn't fine. The fever climbed through the day, bringing delirium with it. She called for her brothers, for her mother, speaking to ghosts in the southern accent she'd been carefully softening. Sawyer did what he could. Willow bark tea for the fever, cool cloths on her forehead, broth spooned carefully between cracked lips when she'd take it. He'd nursed men through worse during the war, but somehow this felt different, more personal, more terrifying. Don't let him find me, she whispered during one lucid moment, gripping his hand with surprising strength. Promise. I promise. Nobody's finding you here. He said I belonged to him. Said it like I was a horse or a piece of furniture. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. I'm so tired of belonging to other people. You don't belong to anyone but yourself, Sawyer said firmly. You hear me, nobody owns you. She squeezed his hand and drifted back into fever dreams. He stayed with her through the night, reading from the one book he owned, a battered copy of Emerson's essays his mother had given him before he left for war. His voice seemed to calm her, so he read until it went hoarse, then read some more. Self-reliance, she murmured once. Read that part again. So he did, reading about the importance of trusting oneself, of nonconformity, of authentic living. The words took on new meaning in the lamplight, with her hand in his and the fever slowly breaking. Dawn came gray and weak through the windows. Margot's breathing had eased, her skin cooler to the touch. When she opened her eyes, they were clear again. "You stayed," she said, voice barely a whisper. "Where else would I go? It's my cabin." She smiled weakly, practical as always. "Someone has to be." He helped her sit up, supported her while she sipped water. "Fever's broken, but you'll be weak for days. No arguing about bed rest." "Wouldn't dream of it." She looked around, seemed to realize she was in his bed. "Where did you sleep?" "Chair by the fire. I've slept in worse places." "Sawyer." She paused, searching for words. "Thank you." "For what? Reading boring philosophy at you?" "For seeing me as a person, not a scandal or a prize or a problem to solve. Just a person." The simplicity of her gratitude hit him harder than any flowery speech could have. "Everyone deserves that much," he said gruffly. "Do they? I'm not sure the world agrees with you." Over the following days, as she recovered, something shifted between them. The careful distance they'd maintained began to close, not through any grand gestures, but through small intimacies. The way she'd touch his shoulder when passing behind his chair, how he'd bring her tea without being asked, knowing exactly how she liked it. Conversations that ran deeper, touching on dreams and fears they'd shared with no one else. "I used to paint," she told him one evening. "Watercolors, mostly, landscapes. Mother said it was a proper accomplishment for a lady." "Did you enjoy it?" "I loved it. The way colors bled into each other, how you could capture light with just the right wash of yellow." Her eyes went distant. "I had to leave all my supplies behind. Another life I'll never get back." "Could get new supplies? Start again. With what money and where would I sell paintings? Who buys art from a runaway bride?" "Maybe it's not about selling. Maybe it's just about creating something beautiful because you can." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "When did you become a philosopher?" "Blame Emerson. Man's words stick in your head." That night, the wind howled particularly fierce, rattling the windows in their frames. Margot sat close to the fire, working on mending one of Sawyer's shirts. He watched her from across the room, noting how the firelight caught in her dark hair, how her fingers moved with practiced efficiency. "What?" she asked without looking up. "Nothing, just thinking." "Dangerous habit." "So I've been told." She set down the mending, met his eyes. "Sawyer, what happens when spring comes really?" "What do you want to happen?" "That's not an answer." "Sure it is, just not the one you're looking for." She stood, paced to the window. Outside, snow continued to fall, endless and implacable. "I can't stay here forever." "Nobody said forever." "But you're thinking it." She turned to face him. "I can see it in how you look at me sometimes. Like you're imagining a future that includes both of us." "Maybe I am." The admission cost him, but she deserved truth. "That scare you?" "Yes," no hesitation. "Because I'm imagining it too. And that's not who I am. I don't lean on people. I don't need saving." "Good. Because I'm not offering to save you, I'm offering to stand beside you. If you'll have me, there's a difference." "Is there, or is that just what we tell ourselves?" He crossed to her, stopped just out of reach. "You tell me. Have I tried to cage you, told you what to do, where to go, how to act?" "No, you've been careful, respectful. Because that's what you deserve. Not because you're weak, but because you're strong. Takes a strong person to accept help without losing themselves." She looked up at him, and for a moment, he thought she might close the distance between them. Then she stepped back, wrapped her arms around herself. "I need time," she said quietly, "to figure out who I am when I'm not running." "Time you've got. Winter's not nearly done with us yet." That night, lying in his makeshift bed by the fire while she slept in his room. Sawyer stared at the ceiling and wondered when exactly he'd started thinking of the cabin as theirs instead of his. It should worry him more than it did, this erosion of his carefully maintained solitude. But listening to her quiet breathing from the next room, he found only a strange peace. Whatever came with spring would come. For now, there was winter and work, and the slow building of something that might be trust. Outside, fresh snow began to fall, covering the strange tracks that had appeared at the forest's edge. Human tracks, too deliberate to be a lost hunter's, too careful to be casual. Someone was watching. But inside the cabin, two damaged souls continued their careful dance around each other, unaware that their winter sanctuary was about to be tested by more than weather. Part 4, The Price of a Name. The man appeared at dawn like a specter from the mist, sitting easy on a black gelding at the edge of the clearing. Sawyer spotted him through the window while putting coffee on, and something cold settled in his gut. "Company," he said quietly. Margot looked up from the biscuits she was making. "Who?" "Don't know yet. Stay inside." He checked the rifle by the door, made sure his Colt sat loose in its holster, then stepped onto the porch. The visitor hadn't moved, patient as a cat watching a mouse hole. "Morning," Sawyer called out. The man touched his hat brim. "Morning. Would be Sawyer Reed. I'm guessing." "Would be. And you?" "Ethan Cole." The man urged his horse forward into better light. He was lean, weathered, with the careful movements of someone who made his living in dangerous ways. "Mind if I step down? Been riding since before dawn." "Suit yourself." Cole dismounted, keeping his hands visible. Professional courtesy among armed men. "Nice place you got here. Must have taken some work, building it up alone." "I manage." Sawyer leaned against the porch post, casual but ready. "Don't get many visitors up here. You lost?" "No, sir. I'm exactly where I mean to be." Cole pulled a folded paper from his coat, shook it open. Even from the porch, Sawyer could see it was a wanted poster. "Looking for someone who might have passed this way. Woman named Margot Lair, about 25, dark hair, pretty in that refined sort of way." What she wanted for theft. Took some valuable jewelry from her intended. Man's offering good money for her return. "How much?" $500. More if she's brought back unmarked." Sawyer kept his face neutral. "That's considerable money." "It is indeed. Lucas Averill don't like being made a fool of, and he's got the cash to prove it." Cole studied him. "You seen anyone matching that description?" "Winter's been hard. Haven't been to town in weeks." "That's not what I asked." Through the window, Sawyer caught movement, Margot listening, probably fighting the urge to run. He willed her to stay still. "No," he said evenly. "Haven't seen any refined ladies wandering the mountain in winter. Wouldn't last long if they did." Cole nodded slowly. "Mind if I water my horse long ride back to town?" "Troughs round the side." While Cole tended his horse, Sawyer stayed on the porch, watching. The bounty hunter moved with economical grace, taking in everything without seeming to look. His eyes lingered on the cabin windows, the stable, anywhere someone might hide. "Appreciate the water," Cole said, returning. "One more thing. Mr. Reed, I noticed tracks leading up here. 2 horses, few days old but still readable. You have visitors recently." "Jake Morrison helped me haul supplies before the last storm. Both horses carrying weight on the way up." Sawyer met his eyes steadily. "You calling me a liar?" "Just doing my job. Man in my profession learns to read sign. Those tracks tell a story of 2 riders, not pack horses." Cole swung back into his saddle. "I'll be honest with you. Reed, the woman's trail leads this direction. Weather's been too bad for her to get far on foot. That means she found shelter somewhere." Plenty of abandoned cabins in these mountains. True enough, but most aren't stocked with food and firewood. Cole gathered his reins. I'll be staying in Dry Creek for a spell. If you happen to remember seeing anything, I'll make it worth your while. Finder's fee, you might say. I'll keep that in mind. You do that. Cole touched his hat again. Be seeing you, Mr. Reed. Sawyer waited until horse and rider disappeared into the trees before going inside. Margot stood pressed against the wall beside the window, face pale. He knows, she said. He suspects there's a difference. I should leave, now, before he comes back with a warrant And go where in this weather on foot. Sawyer shook his head. That's exactly what he wants. Flush you out. Run you down in the open. I won't let you risk yourself for... You won't let me. He turned on her, anger flaring. Last I checked, this was still my home. I decide what risks I take. That's not... I didn't mean... She took a breath. I'm trying to protect you. Don't. The word came out harder than intended. He gentled his tone. I've been protecting myself for years. Don't need to start accepting help now. But that's exactly what you're asking me to do. Accept help. The parallel stopped him short. She was right, and they both knew it. Fair point, he admitted. So what do you want to do? She moved to the table, sat down heavily. I don't know. I'm tired of running, but I can't go back. Won't go back. Then we wait. Cole's good, but he's not patient. Week or two of nothing, and Averill will send him elsewhere. You don't know Lucas. He doesn't give up. Neither do we. The word hung between them. We? When had he started thinking in plurals? That afternoon, while Margot cleaned the already spotless cabin, nervous energy needing outlet, Sawyer rode the property line. Fresh snow had covered most tracks, but he found what he was looking for near the eastern boundary. Boot prints, different from Cole's, circling back toward town. The bounty hunter had brought backup. Smart. Have them search while he asked questions. Covered more ground that way. They'd be back. He was unsaddling his horse when he heard the crack of a rifle. Distant but distinct. Then another. Signal shots. Meant to carry. Margot burst from the cabin. What was that? Hunters, maybe. But he didn't believe it. Get inside. Pack what you can carry. We're leaving. Being ready to leave. Different thing. They spent the evening preparing. Food wrapped in oilcloth. Ammunition divided between them. His winter coat altered to fit her better. She worked without complaint, but he could see the strain in how her hands shook slightly as she rolled blankets. Where would we go? She asked finally. South first, toward the Garrett Ranch. Loop back north through the canyons. There's an old trapper's cabin about 15 miles up. Hasn't been used in years, but the roof's still good. And then we figure out the next move. She nodded, went back to packing, but later, as they sat by the fire, she said quietly, I could just go back. What? Think about it. I return the jewels, apologize prettily, play the confused woman who made a terrible mistake. Lucas saves face, drops the charges. You stay safe. And you end up married to a man who hurts people for burning eggs. Maybe that's just the price. Maybe everyone pays somehow, and I've been foolish thinking I could avoid it. Sawyer set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. You're talking about giving up. I'm talking about being practical. No, you're talking about sacrificing yourself because you think it'll be easier for everyone else. That's not practical. It's just another kind of running. Is it, or is staying here, endangering you, the real cowardice? He crossed to where she sat, knelt so they were eye level. Listen to me. I've made a lot of choices in my life. Some good, some bad. But helping you isn't one I'll regret, regardless of what comes. You can't know that. I know that sending you back to that man would be something I'd regret. Every day for the rest of my life. He took her hands, careful of the still healing blisters. I've been hiding up here, telling myself I was living free, but it wasn't freedom. It was just fear dressed up pretty. You coming here, it's woken something in me. Made me remember why some things are worth fighting for. Sawyer. I'm not asking for promises. Not asking for anything except that you stop trying to protect me from my own choices. He squeezed her hands gently. Deal. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Deal. Neither of them moved to pull away. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, wind rattled the windows, but inside felt suddenly, impossibly warm. I should check the stock, Sawyer said finally, though he made no move to rise. They're fine, Margot whispered. You checked them an hour ago. Did I? You did. The space between them seemed to shrink without either moving. Her eyes, dark in the firelight, held questions he wasn't sure how to answer. Or maybe he was afraid of the answers. A log shifted in the fire, breaking the spell. They pulled apart, Margot turning back to her mending while Sawyer did, in fact, go check the stock again. The cold air felt good on his heated face. When he returned, she'd banked the fire for the night and retreated to the bedroom, but she'd left the door slightly open, lamplight spilling through the gap. An invitation or just carelessness he didn't know. Didn't trust himself to find out. He made his bed by the dying fire, as he had every night since she'd arrived. But sleep eluded him, chased away by thoughts of what might be and what definitely shouldn't be. Not now, with danger circling like wolves. Not when she was still deciding who she wanted to be. Sometime after midnight, he heard her moving, footsteps soft on the wooden floor, hesitating at the doorway. Can't sleep, he asked quietly. No. She stepped into the room, wrapped in a blanket. Keep thinking about tomorrow. Tomorrow will come whether we think about it or not. Philosopher again. But there was warmth in her voice. She settled into the chair across from him. Tell me something true. Like what? Like why you really left Missouri? He stared at the embers for a long moment. Killed a man, he said finally. After the war, he was carpetbagger, buying up farms for nothing, throwing families off land they'd worked for generations. Came to my place with 3 others. Said I had a week to get out. What happened? I said no. They decided to convince me otherwise. Started with pushing, ended with guns. When the smoke cleared, he was dead, 2 others wounded. Self-defense, clear as day. But he had connections. Judge, sheriff, whole system in his pocket. So you ran. So I ran. He looked at her. Not proud of it, but staying meant hanging for defending what was mine. That's why you understood about running. That's why. She pulled the blanket tighter. My turn for truth. If you want. The jewels weren't the only things I took. She met his eyes. I also took evidence. Letters between Lucas and various officials, detailing bribes, threats, worse, insurance. I thought, but I left them in Denver, hidden in a hotel. Thought I was being clever. Might still be there. Might be, or Lucas might have found them already. She stood. Either way, it doesn't matter now. Could matter. Evidence like that would require me to trust the law, and we both know how well that works for people like us. She had a point. They sat in silence, watching the fire die to nothing. Finally. She rose to return to bed, pausing at the doorway. Sawyer, what you said earlier, about some things being worth fighting for. What did you mean? He considered his words carefully. I meant that hiding from the world only works if you've got nothing in it worth protecting. Soon as you do, hiding becomes its own kind of prison. And what's worth protecting here? You tell me. She stood there a moment longer, silhouetted in the doorway. Then she was gone, leaving only the scent of lavender soap and possibility. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering tracks both old and new. But Sawyer knew it wouldn't matter. Come morning, Cole would be back, probably with help and official papers. The game of cat and mouse was ending, one way or another. He checked his guns one more time, made sure everything was ready for quick departure. Then he tried to sleep, knowing he'd need his strength for whatever came next. In the darkness, he heard Margot whisper his name, so soft he might have imagined it. He didn't answer, couldn't trust what he might say. Some truths were too dangerous to speak, especially when the world seemed determined to tear apart anything good before it could take root. But lying there in the dark, listening to her breathe in the next room, Sawyer Reed made a decision. Whatever came with dawn, wherever they had to run, he wouldn't let her face it alone. That was his truth, simple and immutable as the mountains themselves. Part Phi Town Square. The ride into Dry Creek felt like riding into a storm. Even though the morning dawned clear and cold, Sawyer had made the decision at first light running would only postpone the inevitable. Better to face it head on, in town where there were witnesses, where law still meant something. "This is madness," Margot said for the third time as they descended toward the valley. "Cole will arrest me the moment we show our faces." "Maybe, but hiding hasn't solved anything." Sawyer kept his voice steady, though doubt gnawed at him. Sometimes the best defense is to stop defending. They'd left at dawn, taking the main trail bold as brass. If Cole had men watching, let them see. Let them wonder what game Sawyer Reed was playing. The town came into view, smoke rising from chimneys, the normal bustle of morning business already underway. But as they rode down Main Street, Sawyer noticed the looks, some curious, others hostile, a few sympathetic. News traveled fast in small towns. "There," Margot said quietly. "By the sheriff's office." Cole stood on the boardwalk, coffee in hand, watching their approach with the patience of a man who'd already won. Beside him, Sheriff Dobson looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Sawyer reined up in front of them. "Morning, Sheriff Cole. Mr. Reed." Dobson cleared his throat. "Wasn't expecting to see you in town." "Got business to conduct." Sawyer dismounted, helped Margot down. She stood straight-backed, chin high, every inch the lady despite her borrowed clothes. "Heard there's been some accusations flying around." "Now, Sawyer," Dobson started, but Cole cut him off. "No accusations, facts. This woman is wanted for theft in Cheyenne. I've got papers." "Then let's see them." Sawyer kept his hand away from his gun, but ready. "Man ought to see what he's accused of helping." Cole pulled out the warrant, passed it over. Sawyer read it slowly, aware of the growing crowd. Mrs. Henderson from the bakery, Jake Morrison from the stable, even Reverend Calhoun from the Methodist Church. Good. The more witnesses, the better. "Says here Miss Lair stole jewelry worth $10,000. Sawyer looked up. "That's a lot of money." "It is indeed," Cole agreed. "Strange thing, though, also says these jewels were wedding gifts." Sawyer raised his voice so the crowd could hear. "Now, I'm just a simple man, but seems to me a wedding gift belongs to the bride, not the groom, especially if the wedding never happened." Murmurs ran through the crowd. "Mrs." Henderson stepped forward. "That true, Miss? Were they your jewels?" Margot found her voice. "They were my mother's, given to me before she died, long before I ever met Mr. Averill." "She's lying," Cole said flatly. "Woman facing jail time will say anything." "Will she?" Sawyer turned to face the crowd fully. "How many of you have had dealings with Lucas Averill's railroad company? How many have seen what kind of man he is?" An uncomfortable silence fell. Then, from the back, "Averill's company cheated my brother out of his farm. Legal, they said, but it weren't right." Others nodded. Memories of sharp dealings and broken promises surfacing. "That's got nothing to do with ye," Cole started. Doesn't it? Sawyer pulled the wanted poster from his pocket, held it high. This paper says Margot Lair is a thief, but I say she's a woman who refused to be sold, who took what was hers and ran rather than submit to a man who'd already shown his true nature. That's a pretty speech, Cole said, but the law's the law. Is it? Reverend Calhoun stepped forward, his weathered face grave. I've been ministering in these parts for 15 years. Seen a lot of law that wasn't justice. Seems to me we ought to hear the lady's side before we go handing her over. I've already heard. You've heard Averil's side, the Reverend corrected. That's not the same thing. Sheriff Dobson cleared his throat. Now, folks, let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's procedures to follow. Then follow them, Sawyer said, but follow them here, where folks can see, not in some back room deal. The crowd had grown larger. Sawyer spotted Mrs. Delaney, the banker's wife, pushing to the front. She'd lost a daughter years back, and her face held a mother's fury as she looked at Margot's bruised wrists. Those marks on your arms. Child, she said loudly. Where'd they come from? Margot glanced at Sawyer, then straightened. Mister, Avril believed in discipline. When I questioned his treatment of his servants, he showed me what questioning earned. The crowd's mood shifted, darkened. These were frontier folk who'd seen their share of hardship, but they had firm ideas about how men should treat women. That's a lie, Cole said, but his protest lacked conviction. Is it, Mrs.? Delaney's voice could have etched glass. Show us your arms, dear. Let us see these lies. Margot pushed up her sleeves. The bruises had faded to yellow-green, but the pattern was clear fingers wrapped around wrists, holding too tight. A woman near the front gasped. Could have gotten those anywhere, Cole said, but he was losing the crowd and knew it. Mr. Cole, Sheriff Dobson said slowly. I'm thinking maybe we should wire Cheyenne. Get the full story before we do anything hasty. I have the full story. I have a warrant. You have a piece of paper. Dobson's backbone seemed to be stiffening. In Dry Creek, we like to know the truth before we act on pieces of paper. The standoff might have continued, but thunder of hooves interrupted. 6 riders swept into town, dust swirling despite the snow. They reined up hard, and Sawyer's heart sank as he recognized the lead rider, Thomas Brennan, Averil's chief enforcer, a man whose reputation preceded him like a bad smell. Well, well, Brennan said, eyes finding Margot. The runaway bride, Mr. Avril will be pleased. This is my jurisdiction, Dobson said, but his voice lacked authority against Brennan's presence. Not anymore. Brennan produced a sheaf of papers. Federal warrant, signed by Judge Hartley in Cheyenne. The woman comes with us. Federal Sawyer stepped forward. For theft of jewelry, interstate flight, crossing the territorial line made it federal. Brennan smiled, cold as winter wind. You must be Reed, Mr. Avril mentioned you might be a problem. I'm no problem to anyone operating within the law. Good. Then you won't mind us taking what's ours. She's not yours to take. The words came out harder than Sawyer intended. Brennan's smile widened. That sounds like a problem to me, boys. The 5 riders with him spread out, hands resting on pistols. The crowd began backing away, sensing violence in the air like smoke before a fire. Nobody wants trouble, Dobson said quickly. Let's all just calm down and... The only way this stays calm, Brennan said, is if the woman comes quietly. Otherwise, well, federal warrants give us considerable latitude in their execution. You mean you'll shoot anyone who objects? Sawyer translated. I mean we'll uphold the law against those who'd obstruct it. Margot stepped forward before Sawyer could stop her. Enough. I won't have bloodshed on my account. Margot, no. It's done. Sawyer. She met his eyes, and he saw resignation there. This was always going to end one way. Like hell. The voice came from the crowd. Jake Morrison pushed through. The young stablehand's face flushed with indignation. "Miss Margot helped my sister when she was sick last week. Brought medicine from her own supplies. That's not something a thief does." "Boy, you best step back," Brennan warned. But Jake's courage had sparked something. The blacksmith, Frank Cooper, moved to stand beside him. "The boy's right. We've all seen Miss Margot these past days. Seen her work. Help folks. Act with dignity despite everything. That tells us more than any paper. You people are interfering with federal business." Brennan's voice held threat now. "Are we, Mrs.?" Henderson stepped forward, flour still dusting her apron. "Seems to me we're just standing here on our own street, in our own town. That federal business, too." More townspeople moved, not threatening but not yielding either. They formed a loose circle, Margot and Sawyer at its center. Brennan's hand moved toward his gun. "I wouldn't." Sheriff Dobson had found his spine at last, his own hand resting on his pistol. "You might have federal paper, but this is still my town. You want to take someone from Dry Creek, you'll do it legal and proper, not at gunpoint." "This is legal." "Then you won't mind waiting while I wire the federal marshal in Denver. Verify everything's in order." Dobson's smile held no warmth. "Shouldn't take more than a day or two." "You're making a mistake. Sheriff, Mr. Averill has powerful friends." "And I've got these folks." Dobson gestured to the crowd. "I know which I'd rather face, come Judgment Day." The standoff stretched taut. Sawyer counted heartbeats, measured distances, calculated odds. 6 armed men against a town. It would be a massacre if it started. But these men were hired guns, not crusaders. They wanted easy money, not a bloodbath. Finally, Brennan spat in the dirt. "Have it your way, Sheriff. But this isn't over. We'll be back with more men, more papers. Official ones that even you can't ignore." "Then I'll read them when you bring them," Dobson said evenly. Brennan wheeled his horse, his men following, but before riding off, he looked directly at Margot. "Mr. Averill sends his regards. Says to tell you he's a patient man, but his patience has limits. You know what happens when those limits are reached." They thundered out of town, leaving dust and tension in their wake. The crowd began to disperse, but not before several people patted Margot's shoulder or murmured words of support. "Thank you," Margot said to Dobson, voice barely steady. The sheriff looked older suddenly. "Warren." "Don't thank me yet. I bought you time. Nothing more. Brennan wasn't bluffing about those connections. Come tomorrow, maybe the day after. They'll be back with papers I can't refuse." "Then we'll face that when it comes," Sawyer said. Dobson studied him. "Son, you sure you want to tie yourself to this? Averill's not the forgiving type." "Neither am I." Reverend Calhoun approached, his face thoughtful. "Miss Lair, might I suggest something? I've been corresponding with Judge Morrison in Laramie. He's a fair man, owes no favors to the railroad. If we could get your case before him, present evidence of Mr. Averill's character." "What evidence?" Margot asked bitterly. "His word against mine." "Perhaps not." Mrs. Delaney spoke up. "My husband sits on the Territorial Banking Board. There have been questions about some of Mr. Averill's dealings, irregularities that suggest a pattern of coercion and fraud." "You'd speak to that?" "I would, and I'd wager others would too, given the chance." She looked around at the gathered townspeople. "We've all seen or heard things. Maybe separately they mean nothing, but together." Hope flickered in Margot's eyes. Sawyer felt it too. Fragile as spring ice, but real. "It's worth trying," he said. "I'll draft a letter today." Reverend Calhoun promised, "with supporting statements from whoever will sign. Sheriff, will you hold off any federal papers until we hear back?" Dobson nodded slowly. "I can delay things a few days, verify authenticity, check procedures, but that's all I can give you." "It's enough," Sawyer said. "We'll make it enough." The crowd finally dispersed, people returning to their business but carrying the morning's events with them. Sawyer knew by evening everyone in the valley would know what had happened. That could work for or against them. "You shouldn't have come here," Margot said as they led their horses to the stable. "Should have let me face this alone. Thought we'd settled that discussion." "We settled nothing. You just keep making choices that put you at risk." "So do you." He caught her arm gently, turned her to face him. "Difference is, I'm making my choices freely. Nobody's forcing me. Aren't they, your consciences, your damn nobility?" "That's not force, that's just being human." She laughed, short and bitter. "Humanity, that's what got us both into trouble in the first place." "Maybe, but it's also what got the town to stand with you today. Humanity's not always a weakness. Margot..." "Isn't it?" But her voice had softened. "When I saw those people, ready to face down armed men for me, a stranger, a scandal, I didn't know what to think. Think that maybe you're worth standing up for, that what Averill says about you isn't who you are." "And who am I?" "You're the woman who helped Jake's sister, who learns to split wood without complaint, who faces down fever and bounty hunters and her own fears without breaking..." He touched her face gently. "You're someone worth fighting for." "Sawyer, I know, wrong time, wrong place. But I needed you to hear it. In case..." She stopped his words with her fingers against his lips. Don't talk about in case. We're going to win this." "Are we?" "We are." Fierce determination lit her eyes. "Because for the first time in my life, I have something worth fighting for too. Not just survival, not just escape, but a future. Here. With..." Now it was his turn to stop her words, though he used his lips instead of his fingers. The kiss was brief, mindful of their public location, but it held promises that no amount of federal warrants could break. When they parted, Jake Morrison stood grinning at them from the stable door. "About time," the boy said cheekily. "Whole town's been taking bets on when you two would figure it out." Despite everything, Margot laughed, real laughter, free of bitterness. And who won? Mrs. Henderson said it would happen when things looked darkest. Woman knows her romance stories. They spent the rest of the day in town, visiting those willing to provide statements for Judge Morrison. The stories that emerged painted a picture of Lucas Averill that would have damned him in any fair court intimidation. Bribery, violence hidden behind legal facades. "Will it be enough?" Margot asked as evening fell. "Has to be," Sawyer said. "We'll make it be." But as they prepared to leave town, planning to ford up at the ranch in case Brennan tried something before official channels, Cole appeared from the shadows. A word, read. Sawyer tensed, but the bounty hunter's hands stayed visible and empty. "Talk." "I've been in this business 15 years, tracked all kinds killers, thieves, worse, got good at reading people." Cole glanced at Margot. "She's no thief." "Then why?" "Job's a job. Man's gotta eat." Cole shrugged. "But there's jobs and there's jobs. This one's starting to smell wrong." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Brennan's planning something. Heard him talking to his boys. They're not waiting for new papers." Cole met Sawyer's eyes. "You didn't hear this from me, but if I were you, I wouldn't go back to that cabin tonight. Or any night soon." "Why tell us?" "Because I've done things I'm not proud of for money, but I've never helped the railroad an innocent woman." He touched his hat to Margot. "Ma'am, good luck to you." He melted back into the shadows, leaving them with a warning and a choice. "We can't go back," Margot said. "No, but I know somewhere else we can go. Somewhere Brennan won't think to look." Sawyer took her hand. "Trust me. With my life." As they rode out of town, taking back trails in the growing darkness, Sawyer allowed himself a moment of hope. The town had stood with them. They had allies. Evidence. A judge who might listen. It wasn't much against Averil's money and influence, but it was something. And sometimes, something was all you needed to start an avalanche. Behind them, Dry Creek settled into evening, but the conversations continued in homes and shops. The story of the morning standoff grew with each telling, becoming something larger than itself. By morning, it would be legend. And legends, Sawyer knew, had power all their own. Hash Part 6, Hawthorne Night. The old trapper's cabin sat in a narrow canyon, hidden by a stand of pine and a trick of geography that made it invisible until you were almost on top of it. Sawyer had found it years ago, kept it stocked for emergencies. Tonight qualified. "It's perfect," Margot said, surveying the single room with its stone fireplace and sturdy walls. "How did you know about this place?" "A man living alone learns to have backup plans." He began unloading supplies they'd grabbed from town. "Used to belong to French Pete, trapped these mountains for 30 years. When he died, nobody else knew about it." They worked in efficient silence, settling the horses in the small lean-to, bringing in firewood, checking sight lines from the windows. The cabin backed against a cliff face with only one approach defensible if it came to that. "Do you think Cole was telling the truth?" Margot asked as they finished. "About Brennan. Cole's many things, but he's not a liar. If he says Brennan's planning something..." Sawyer checked his rifle again. "We'll take watches tonight." "I can shoot." "I know you can." He'd seen her practice, noted her steady hands and good eye, but hopefully it won't come to that. They ate cold biscuits and dried beef, not risking a fire until full dark. The silence between them held new weight after the morning's kiss. Promises made but not yet spoken. "I've been thinking," Margot said finally, "about what Mrs. Delaney said, evidence of Averil's other dealing." "What about it?" "Those papers I mentioned, the ones I left in Denver, they weren't just about bribes. There were letters discussing worse things, plans to force out homesteaders along the railroad route, mentions of accidents that weren't accidents. That's evidence that could put him away, or get me killed for having it." She met his eyes. "But if it could help others, stop him from destroying more lives. Denver's 5 days' ride in good weather, longer with Brennan watching the roads." "I know, but after the hearing, if we survive this..." "When we survive this," Sawyer corrected. "No sense borrowing trouble from tomorrow." She smiled slightly. "You're right. First we deal with tonight." As if summoned by her words, a sound drifted through the darkness, horses moving carefully up the canyon. Sawyer doused the lamp immediately, moved to the window. Moonlight revealed nothing, but the sounds continued. Multiple riders, trying for stealth. "They found us," Margot whispered. "Maybe. Could be anyone." But Sawyer didn't believe it. The movement was too careful, too purposeful. "Get to the back corner. If shooting starts..." "I'm not hiding while you fight." "Margot..." "No," steel in her voice. "We stand together or not at all." Before he could argue, a voice called out, "Reed, we know you're in there. Come out peaceful-like and nobody gets hurt." "Brennan," Sawyer cursed under his breath. "How about you ride on and we all sleep peaceful?" Sawyer called back. "Can't do that, mister. Averil wants his property returned." "She's not property," Sawyer snarled. "Law says different. Now, you going to be smart about this?" Sawyer counted muzzle flashes in the darkness, at least 4 rifles aimed at the cabin. They were bracketed. No good angles for escape. But the cabin walls were thick, would stop bullets if it came to shooting. "Need a minute to think about it," he called. "You got 5, then we come in." Sawyer turned to find Margot checking her pistol. Face calm. "How many bullets do you have?" 18 for the rifle, 12 for the Colt." "I've got 6. She looked toward the window. "Not enough if they rush us." "No." He mind raced, calculating odds. "But maybe we don't need bullets." "What do you mean?" He pointed to the cliff face behind them. French Pete didn't just trap. He also mined a little. Blasted a shaft about 30 feet up. If we could reach it, in the dark under fire. Better than dying here. He grabbed rope from the supplies. There's handholds, if you know where to look. Sawyer, trust me. She nodded without hesitation. Always. Time's up, Reed. Brennan's voice held anticipation. What's it gonna be? Give me another minute, the lady's scared. Margot snorted softly. The lady's furious. That works too. Sawyer tied the rope around his waist. When I start climbing, you cover me. Once I'm up, I'll lower the rope. And if they hear you, then we find out how good a shot you really are. He slipped out the back window, grateful for the moon shadows that hid the cliff base. The first handholds came easily, muscle memory from previous climbs. Above, the mine shaft waited like a dark mouth. A shout from below, they'd seen movement. Margot's pistol cracked once, twice, driving them to cover. Sawyer climbed faster, boots scraping against stone. More shots, the whine of bullets off rock. His hand slipped, caught himself just in time. 20 feet, 25, almost there. He's climbing, someone shouted. Get him! Rifle fire erupted. Margot responded from the cabin window. Her shots careful, aimed. A man cried out hit but not dead from the cursing that followed. Sawyer hauled himself into the mine shaft just as bullets sparked where he'd been. Safe, for the moment. He quickly secured the rope and lowered it. Now, he called. Margot burst from the cabin, sprinting for the cliff. Brennan's men concentrated fire on her, but she moved unpredictably, using boulders for cover. She reached the rope and started climbing, faster than Sawyer expected. Flank them! Brennan roared. Get around. His order cut off in a gurgle. Sawyer heard horses' new ones, and suddenly the night erupted in different gunfire. Brennan's men shouted in confusion. Their attention split. Margot reached the shaft, Sawyer pulling her up the last few feet. They lay gasping while below. The gunfight continued. Who? Margot started. Reed, you up there. A familiar voice, Jake Morrison. Jake? Sawyer couldn't believe it. What are you doing here? Brought friends. The young man sounded absurdly cheerful for someone in a gunfight. Figured you might need help. And they had brought friends. By the sound of it, half of Dry Creek had followed them into the mountains. Sawyer recognized voices, Frank Cooper, the blacksmith, several ranch hands, even Reverend Calhoun quoting scripture while apparently shooting at Brennan's men. The fight didn't last long. Outnumbered and outflanked, Brennan's hired guns quickly decided their pay wasn't worth dying for. Within minutes, calls for surrender echoed off the canyon walls. Sawyer and Margot climbed down to find a surreal scene. Brennan sat propped against a rock, clutching a wounded shoulder, while his men knelt with hands raised. The townspeople stood around them, an unlikely posse of shopkeepers and cowboys united by indignation. Reverend Margot stared at the minister, who still held a smoking rifle. You shot someone. Winged him only, Calhoun said mildly. Ecclesiastes does say there's a time for everything. Figured this was a time for righteous action. Sheriff Dobson rode up, looking harried. What in the name of Brennan? What are you doing here? His job, apparently. Sawyer said, ambushing folks in the night. That's a lie, we were merely. Save it. Dobson dismounted, studied the scene. Got 20 witnesses say different. Jake here rode in saying you'd left town heading this direction with killing on your mind. How did you know where we'd gone? Margot asked Jake. The young man flushed. Followed you from town. Figured Mr. Reed would head for the old trapper's place, he mentioned it once. When I saw Brennan's crew heading the same way, I rode back for help. And the town came. Sawyer couldn't hide his amazement. Wasn't hard to convince them. Mrs., Henderson said, emerging from behind a boulder with, improbably, a shotgun. After this morning, folks were plenty riled about outsiders thinking they could push us around. "This is kidnapping," Brennan snarled. "False imprisonment, mister. Averill will—" Mister, Averill will do nothing," a new voice said. Everyone turned to see Cole riding up. Leading a spare horse with a familiar figure tied to the saddle, Lucas Averill himself, looking somewhat worse for wear. "Found him trying to sneak into town," Cole said conversationally. "Figured he was planning something unfortunate, so I convinced him to come along. He's been real talkative about his plans. Sheriff, you might want to hear what he had to say about Judge Hartley and those federal warrants." "You can't believe anything," Averill started. "Oh, I don't know." Cole produced a leather portfolio. "These documents you were carrying seem pretty believable, especially the ones outlining bribes to federal judges." He handed them to Dobson. "Makes for interesting reading." Margot gasped. "Those are copies of what I left in Denver. How—" "Mister, Averill's been a busy man." Cole said, "Retrieved your hidden documents. All right, but he's the kind who keeps records of everything, including his own crimes. Leverage, he calls it." "You work for me," Averill raged at Cole. "Did work for you. Past tense." Cole touched his hat to Margot. "Decided I'd rather be on the right side for once. Novel experience." The scene that followed was controlled chaos. Brennan's men were disarmed and tied. Wounds tended none fatal, to everyone's relief. Averill alternated between threats and attempted bribes, falling silent only when Dobson formally arrested him for attempted murder and conspiracy. "This won't stick," Averill said as they loaded him onto a horse. "I have lawyers, connections, and I have 20 witnesses and your own documents." Dobson replied, "We'll see which weighs more with an honest judge." As the procession prepared to head back to town, Sawyer found himself standing with Margot beneath an old hawthorn tree that grew improbably from a crack in the canyon wall. Its branches, bare all winter, showed the faintest buds of spring growth. "It's over," Margot said, wonder in her voice. "It's really over. This part is—" Sawyer took her hands. "Still have the legal proceedings, getting those documents to the right authorities." "But he can't hurt anyone else. Can't hurt me." Tears ran down her face. "I'm free." "You always were. Just took a while to prove it to everyone else." She laughed, watery but real. "And what now? I'm still a scandal, a runaway bride. That doesn't just disappear." "Maybe not, but you're also the woman who stood up to a powerful man and won, who helped unite a town." "Who—" He stopped, suddenly unsure. "Who what?" "Who made a lonely man remember why some things are worth fighting for." "Just some things. One thing in particular." The space between them disappeared. This kiss was different from the morning's brief touch, deeper, surer, holding promises that could be kept now that the shadows had lifted. When they parted, half the town seemed to be watching with various degrees of approval. "Mrs." Henderson dabbed at her eyes with her apron. "So," Margot said, color high in her cheeks. "What happens now?" "Now," Sawyer considered. "Now we go home, fix whatever damage Brennan did. Get ready for spring. Together. If you'll have me. If you want to stay. Stay." She looked around at the gathered townspeople. These strangers who'd become allies, who'd risked themselves for justice and a neighbor's well-being. Then back at him. This man who'd offered bread without price and shelter without conditions, who'd stood between her and harm asking nothing in return. "Where else would I go?" she said simply. "This is home now." Reverend Calhoun cleared his throat. "Speaking of which, once this legal matter's settled, I perform a fine wedding service. Very reasonable rates." "Reverend," Margot protested, blushing furiously. "What man's got a plan ahead?" He winked at Sawyer. "Spring's a good time for new beginnings." The ride back to town turned into something of a celebration. Jake regaled everyone with embellished tales of the night's adventure. Mrs. Henderson discussed recipes with Margot as if armed midnight rescues were perfectly normal. Even Cole, riding alongside his prisoners, seemed lighter somehow. "Thank you," Sawyer told him quietly. "For the warning, for everything. Man gets tired of being on the wrong side." Cole said, "Figured it was time for a change." "What'll you do now without the bounty?" "Sheriff Dobson mentioned needing a deputy. Might be I'll stick around, try wearing a badge for the right reasons." He glanced at Margot. "Town like this, people looking out for each other might be worth protecting." As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the peaks rose and gold, they reached Dry Creek. The prisoners were locked up to await transport. Documents were secured for evidence, and life, improbably, began returning to normal. Except for Sawyer and Margot, standing in front of the bakery where it all began. "Full circle," she said softly. "Beginnings usually are." Through the window, fresh loaves cooled on racks. The smell of baking bread drifted out, warm and welcoming. No longer the bread of charity or desperation, but of community and belonging. "I should help with the statements," Margot said, "for the judge." "Later. Right now, you need rest. We both do." "At the cabin." "Our cabin," he corrected. "If you want it to be." "I want—" No hesitation now. "For as long as you'll have me." Forever seems about right. Hand in hand, they walked toward the stable to collect their horses. Behind them, Dry Creek woke to a new day, forever changed by one woman's courage and a town's refusal to bow to money and threats. Above, the hawthorn's buds continued their slow unfurling, promise of beauty to come, and somewhere in the mountains, spring crept closer, ready to transform the landscape with green and growing things. It had been a long, hard winter, but as Sawyer helped Margot mount her horse, as they turned toward home and whatever future they'd build together, he thought perhaps that only made the coming warmth sweeter. Sometimes the best things were worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth believing in, even when the world insisted otherwise. Part 7, Justice Under the Wide Sky. The circuit judge arrived in Dry Creek 2 weeks later, his weathered face showing neither surprise nor judgment as he reviewed the stack of documents Sheriff Dobson presented. Judge Samuel Morrison had ridden the territorial circuit for 15 years, and little shocked him anymore. "Quite a collection," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "Bribes, threats, conspiracy to commit fraud. Mr. Averill has been thorough in documenting his crimes." The makeshift courtroom in the town hall overflowed with spectators. Sawyer sat with Margot in the front row, her hand tight in his, across the aisle. Lucas Averill maintained his arrogant posture despite the shackles, his expensive lawyer looking increasingly uncomfortable as evidence mounted. "Your Honor," the lawyer tried again, "these documents were obtained illegally by Mr. Averill himself, according to testimony." Morrison interrupted. "Can't claim illegal seizure of documents you stole first, Counselor." The proceedings had drawn attention from beyond Dry Creek. A reporter from the Cheyenne Leader sat scribbling notes. Representatives from the railroad company fidgeted in the back, distancing themselves from their former associate as his crimes came to light. "Miss Lair," the judge addressed Margot, "would you please tell the court your version of events?" Margot stood, chin high. She'd worn her best dress, one of Mrs. Henderson's, altered to fit and looked every inch a lady despite the circumstances that brought her here. "Your Honor, I was engaged to Mr. Averill through an arrangement made by my late father. I discovered his true nature when I witnessed him strike a young servant girl for a minor mistake. When I protested, he—" She touched her wrist unconsciously. "He made it clear that wives who questioned their husbands faced consequences. And the jewels were my mother's, given to me before her death. I have letters proving this, predating any engagement. When I fled, I took only what was mine." "Lies," Averill burst out. "She's a thief and a—" Mr. Averill, you'll have your turn," Morrison said coldly. "Continue, Miss Lair." Margot detailed her flight, the pursuit, the threats. Other witnesses followed Mrs. Delaney speaking about bruises she'd seen, Reverend Calhoun testifying to Margot's character, even Cole taking the stand to describe Averill's orders to retrieve Margot by any means necessary. "And what changed your mind about the job?" Morrison asked Cole. "Conscience, Your Honor. That, and seeing how this town stood up for what was right, made me reconsider what kind of man I wanted to be." The most damning testimony came from an unexpected source, a young woman named Clara Hutchins, who'd traveled from Cheyenne with the reporter. She'd been a maid in Averill's household, the very girl Margot had seen struck. "He said if I ever told anyone, he'd ruin my family," Clara said, voice shaking but determined. "But when I heard Miss Margot ran rather than let him do to her what he did to us servants, I knew I had to speak up." "Objection," Averill's lawyer protested. "This is hearsay. This is testimony from a witness to Mr. Averill's character," Morrison corrected. "Very relevant to his claims about Miss Lair. Continue, Miss Hutchins." "The stories that emerged painted a picture of systematic abuse. Servants dismissed without pay for minor infractions. Business rivals ruined through forged documents and bribes. The railroad representatives looked increasingly ill as their association with Averill became a liability." Mr. Averill." Morrison finally addressed the defendant. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Averill stood, his polished manner cracking. "These people don't understand business. Sometimes hard decisions must be made. If servants can't perform their duties, if women won't honor their commitments, a commitment obtained through coercion is no commitment at all." Morrison interrupted. "And business doesn't excuse assault or fraud. You can't take the word of servants and fallen women over mine. I've built railroads, brought prosperity." "You've brought misery and corruption," Morrison said flatly, "and hidden behind your money and connections. That ends today." The judge's ruling was swift and comprehensive. All charges against Margot were dismissed with prejudice. The jewels were confirmed as her rightful property. Furthermore, based on evidence of assault, fraud, and attempted kidnapping, Averill would face criminal trial in federal court. "No!" Averill lunged forward, only to be restrained by Sheriff Dobson and the newly deputized Cole. "You can't do this. I have connections, influence." "Oh, do you have a cell in the federal prison?" Morrison said. "Sheriff, remove him." As they dragged Averill out, still ranting about revenge and retribution, Morrison addressed the court. "Let this be a lesson. Money and power are no shield against justice when good people stand together. Miss Lair, you're free to go with the court's apologies for what you've endured." The courtroom erupted in applause. Margot sagged against Sawyer, tears streaming down her face, relief, joy, and lingering disbelief mixing together. "It's over," she whispered. "The legal part," Sawyer agreed. "The rest is just beginning." Outside the town hall, people crowded around to congratulate Margot, to shake Sawyer's hand, to celebrate justice served. The reporter cornered them, eager for quotes. "Miss Lair, what will you do now?" "Live," she said simply. "Just live." "And you, Mr. Reed, back to your solitary life in the mountains." Sawyer glanced at Margot. "Nothing solitary about it anymore." The celebration continued at the saloon, where even the temperance-minded Mrs. Henderson accepted a small glass of elderberry wine. Stories were told and retold, each version growing more dramatic. Jake Morrison's account of the canyon fight had him personally disarming 3 men, though witnesses remembered it differently. "To justice," someone toasted. "To courage," another added. "To community," Reverend Calhoun said firmly, "for without it, neither justice nor courage matter much." Evening found Sawyer and Margot walking along the creek. away from the noise and celebration. The spring melt had begun, water running high and fast, carrying winter away. Regrets? Sawyer asked. About Averill, none. About the life I might have had. She considered. That life was never real. Just a cage with golden bars. And now I have choices, real ones. She stopped, faced him. Sawyer, I need to say something. You're leaving. His heart sank even as he forced understanding into his voice. I get it. After everything, you want a fresh start somewhere. You beautiful fool, she interrupted, laughing. I'm not leaving. I'm trying to say thank you. For what? For seeing me. Not the scandal or the runaway bride or the damsel in distress. Just me. Do you know how rare that is? Should be common as dirt. Should be. Isn't. She took his hands. I love you. Not from gratitude or need or having nowhere else to go. I love you because you're the first person who ever let me just be myself. Margot! I know we've been dancing around it. Careful not to assume, not to push. But I'm tired of being careful. I want to build a life with you. Have arguments about stupid things. Wake up knowing you're there. Plant a garden and watch it grow. Would you want that too? Want it? Sawyer pulled her close. I've been wanting it since you stood in that bakery. Proud even in desperation, every day since has just made it stronger. Then why didn't you say anything? Because you needed to choose freely. No obligations, no debts, just choice. I choose you, she said firmly. Today, tomorrow, all the days after. They kissed there by the rushing creek, spring water singing around them, washing away the last of winter's hold. Later, back at the celebration, Reverend Calhoun cornered them with a knowing smile. Set a date yet? Reverend Margot protested. What spring wedding would be nice? Flowers blooming, fresh starts and all. We haven't even, Sawyer began. Haven't you, Mrs. Henderson joined them. Whole town's been watching you two circle each other like shy colts. About time you made it official. Maybe we'd like some privacy to decide, Margot suggested. Privacy, Jake laughed from nearby. In Dry Creek you're dreaming, Miss Margot. And perhaps that was the truth of it. Privacy was for the lonely. The isolated community meant shared joys and sorrows, everyone's business being everyone's business. After years of solitude, Sawyer found he didn't mind as much as he'd expected. May, he said suddenly. First Saturday in May. What? Margot turned to him. For the wedding, if you'll have me, gives us time to build a proper room onto the cabin. Let folks recover from all this excitement. Sawyer Reed, is that a proposal? Not a very good one. He dropped to one knee right there in the saloon, ignoring the whoops and hollers. Margot Lair, you've turned my quiet life upside down. Made me remember what it's like to care about something beyond my own peace. Will you marry me and keep doing that for the rest of our days? Yes, she said, laughing and crying at once. Yes to all of it. The saloon erupted. Someone started playing a fiddle. Couples began dancing. Cole raised a glass to them from across the room, his new deputy's badge glinting in the lamplight. One thing, Sheriff Dobson said, approaching with a ledger. Need to record this proper, Miss Lair, for the legal record. What's your full given name? Margaret Louise Lair, she said, though I've been Margot since childhood. And after May, Margaret Louise Reed, Sawyer said firmly, my wife. The word sent another cheer through the crowd. Plans began immediately. Who would cook what for the wedding feast? Which flowers would be blooming? Whether Jake could be trusted as ring-bearer. Lord help us, Sawyer muttered. They're going to plan the whole thing tonight. Let them, Margot said, leaning into him. They've earned the right to celebrate. We all have. Late that night, They rode back to the cabin under a canopy of stars. The danger had passed. The future spread before them full of possibility. There would be challenges, there always were, but they'd face them together. "No more secrets," Margot said as they unsaddled the horses. "No more running. Just truth from here on." "Truth," Sawyer agreed. "Starting with this, I love you, future Mrs. Reed." "And I love you, Mr. Reed, even if you did propose in a saloon." "Would you have preferred something fancier?" "No," she said, moving into his arms. "It was perfect, public, honest, with our friends around us. Everything I never knew I wanted." Inside the cabin, they built up the fire and made plans, practical ones about expanding the house, dreamy ones about children and gardens and years stretching ahead. Outside, spring continued its patient work, transforming the harsh landscape into something gentler. "I want to paint again," Margot said suddenly. "Capture this place, these mountains. Show people the beauty I found here." "We'll get supplies next trip to town." She smiled at the word. "I like the sound of that." "I better get used to it." They talked until dawn crept over the peaks, painting the world in shades of gold and possibility. The coffee pot bubbled on the stove. Bread dough rose in its bowl, ready for baking. Simple things, but somehow sacred in their ordinariness. A knock at the door interrupted breakfast. They found Jake Morrison on the porch, grinning wide. "Morning. Folks' sheriff sent me to check on you, make sure you hadn't run off to elope or something." "Wouldn't dream of it," Margot said. "Too many people would never forgive us." "That's the truth. Mrs. Henderson's already planning the cake. 3 layers, she says." Jake accepted a cup of coffee gratefully. "Oh, and there's news from Cheyenne. That reporter's story ran, 'Love and Justice in Dry Creek.' He called it, 'Made you both sound like heroes.'" "We're not heroes," Sawyer said uncomfortably. "Sure you are. You stood up to power, showed folks what courage looks like. If that ain't heroic, what is?" After Jake left, they stood together on the porch, watching the sun climb higher. The homestead spread before them, no longer just Sawyer's refuge, but their shared future. "Heroes," Margot mused. "I just wanted to be free, and I just wanted to help. Maybe that's all heroism is, ordinary people doing what's right when it matters." "Philosophy before noon. You're spending too much time with those Emerson essays." She laughed, the sound bright as morning. "Someone has to read them. You only managed 3 pages before falling asleep last night." In my defense, it had been a very long day. They all have been lately. "Good days, though. Worth the trouble." "Worth everything," she agreed. They went inside to finish breakfast and begin their day, their life together. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal and patient, having seen countless human dramas play out in their shadows. But perhaps none quite like this, a lonely cowboy and a desperate bride, finding in each other not just love, but purpose. Not just shelter, but home. Justice had been served. Love had been declared. And in the wide sky above Wyoming, spring unfurled its banner of blue and endless possibility. Hash part Selwait, where bread was offered. The first Saturday in May dawned clear and bright, as if nature herself had dressed for the occasion. The hawthorn tree behind Sawyer's cabin, their cabin now had burst into full bloom, its white flowers like scattered stars against the green. "Stop fidgeting," Jake Morrison commanded as he adjusted Sawyer's collar for the 3rd time. "You look fine." "I look like a store clerk," Sawyer muttered, tugging at the new suit Mrs. Henderson had insisted he wear. "You look like a man getting married," Frank Cooper said from the doorway. "Which is the point?" Through the window, Sawyer could see the transformation of his homestead. Tables made from sawhorses and planks stretched across the yard, already laden with food. Wildflowers in mason jars marked the aisle between rows of mismatched chairs borrowed from every house in Dry Creek. Half the town had arrived at dawn to help set up. She might have changed her mind, Sawyer said suddenly. Might have realized she could do better than a hermit with a cabin. She might have, Jake agreed cheerfully. But she didn't. She's over at Mrs. Delaney's right now, probably saying the same fool things about you. Indeed, in the best bedroom of the Delaney house. Margot stood before a mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The dress Mrs. Delaney's own wedding gown, carefully altered, fell in soft ivory folds. Her mother's pearl necklace, recovered from the evidence and returned to her, gleamed at her throat. "You're shaking," Clara Hutchins observed, pinning the last flower into Margot's hair. The former maid had stayed in Dry Creek after the trial, finding work and friendship she'd never known in Averill's house. "I'm terrified," Margot admitted. "Not of Sawyer, but what if I'm not what he needs? What if I can't be a proper frontier wife? Proper Mrs. Delaney laughed. "Child, you face down gunmen and corrupt judges. I think you can handle married life." "Besides," Mrs. Henderson added, bringing in a cup of tea, "Sawyer doesn't want proper, he wants you." A knock interrupted them. Sheriff Dobson's voice called through the door, "Ladies' Reverend says it's time." The walk to the cabin felt both endless and too quick. Margot clutched her bouquet of wildflowers, columbine, and Indian paintbrush, and prairie roses gathered by the town's children that morning. Through the trees, she could hear the fiddle playing, voices talking and laughing. Then she rounded the corner and saw it all, the decorated yard, the gathered crowd, and Sawyer standing beneath the blooming hawthorn, looking uncomfortable in his new clothes and absolutely perfect. Their eyes met across the distance. His face transformed, wonder and love and something like reverence all mixed together. The crowd fell silent as she walked toward him, but Margot saw only Sawyer, this man who'd offered bread without price and shelter without conditions. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Calhoun began when she reached Sawyer's side. "We gather today in the sight of God and this community to witness something remarkable, the triumph of love over adversity, of courage over fear." "Just marry them, Reverend," someone called out. "Save the sermon for Sunday." Laughter rippled through the crowd, breaking the solemnity. Calhoun smiled. "Very well, let's keep this simple, like the love it celebrates." The vows they exchanged were traditional in form, but weighted with their particular journey. When Sawyer promised to protect and cherish, everyone remembered him standing against Brennan's guns. When Margot vowed to honor and support, they recalled her refusal to let him face danger alone. "The rings?" Calhoun asked. Jake stepped forward, only to pat his pockets in growing alarm. "I had them. They were right." "Looking for these," Cole drawled, producing the simple gold bands. "Found them on the ground where Junior dropped them during his third rehearsal of walking up here." More laughter as Jake flushed crimson. The moment of levity warmed the ceremony, made it theirs not some formal ritual but a community celebration. "Margot," Sawyer said, sliding the ring onto her finger, "I promise to give you all my quiet mornings and stormy evenings, my words when I have them and my silence when that says more. I promise to see you always as I saw you first, strong in your need, proud in your courage." "Sawyer," Margot replied, her voice steady despite tears. "I promise to keep your fire burning and your coffee hot, to stand beside you in whatever comes, and to fill your quiet life with just enough noise to keep it interesting. By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming," Calhoun proclaimed, "I declare you husband and wife. Sawyer, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was brief, they were in public, after all, but it held promises of longer, sweeter ones to come. The crowd erupted in cheers, and the fiddle struck up a lively tune. "Ladies and gentlemen," Calhoun announced, "I present Mr. and Mrs. Sawyer Reed." The celebration that followed would be talked about for years. Tables groaned under the weight of food misses. Henderson's 3-layer cake, venison roasted by the ranch hands, vegetables from early gardens, pies and preserves and fresh bread, especially bread, loaves and loaves of it, in memory of how it all began. "A toast," Sheriff Dobson called out, raising his glass, "to the bride and groom, who reminded us that standing together makes us all stronger." "To justice served," someone else added. "To new beginnings," Clara Hutchins said shyly. The toasts continued, each one drawing cheers and raised glasses. Sawyer and Margot moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, sharing embraces with people who'd become family through trial and triumph. As afternoon wore toward evening, the dancing began. Sawyer led Margot out for the first dance, both of them clumsy with self-consciousness until the music caught them, carried them into the simple patterns of a frontier waltz. "We did it," Margot whispered against his shoulder. "Got married, yes, I noticed." "Not just that, all of it. We survived, we won, we're here." "Here," he agreed, spinning her gently, "right where we belong." Others joined them, for Jake dancing enthusiastically with Clara, the Delaney's moving with practiced grace, even Cole accepting misses, Henderson's invitation for a turn around the floor. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, painting everything gold, Reverend Calhoun called for attention. "Before we continue this fine celebration, I believe the bride and groom have something to share." Sawyer and Margot moved to where a cloth-covered board hung on the cabin wall. Together, they unveiled it, revealing words carved deep into the wood. Where bread was offered, a family was born. Below it, smaller letters added, "The Reed Homestead, Est, 1878. "We wanted something to remember," Margot explained. "To remind us and anyone who comes here that kindness matters, that small acts can change everything." "Amen to that," someone murmured. The party continued as stars began to appear. Lanterns lit against the gathering dark, but eventually, with much good-natured teasing and advice they didn't need, the newlyweds were allowed to escape to their cabin. Inside, they found surprise: new curtains sewn by the church ladies, a quilt from Mrs. Delaney, preserves and canned goods stocking the shelves. On the table sat a package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" Margot wondered, opening it carefully. Inside were watercolor paints, brushes, and paper good quality, expensive. A note in Cole's careful hand read, "For capturing the beauty you found. Consider it a wedding gift from someone learning to see it too." "Oh," Margot breathed, touching the colors gently. "Sawyer, look." "I see." He wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Seems the whole town wants to make sure you stay." "As if I'd leave." She turned in his embrace. "This is home. Your home." Outside, they could still hear the celebration continuing. Would probably hear it for hours yet. But inside was quiet. Private. Theirs. "So, Mrs. Reed," Sawyer said softly, "any regrets?" "Only one." At his startled look, she smiled. "I wish we'd done this sooner." "We weren't ready sooner. Neither of us." "No," she agreed. "We had to become ourselves first. Had to learn we were worth fighting for." They stood together in their cabin, expanded now with a proper bedroom. Plans drawn for more additions as needed, and listened to the sounds of community outside. Friends and neighbors celebrating not just a wedding, but a triumph of hope over cynicism, trust over fear. Later, much later, as they lay entwined in their new bed, Margot traced patterns on Sawyer's chest. "Tell me something." "What?" "That first day, when you gave me the bread, did you know how it would end?" No. Hope, maybe a little." He caught her hand, brought it to his lips. I thought you were either the kindest man in the world or the most dangerous. And now?" "Now I know you're both." She kissed him softly. Kind enough to see my worth when I'd forgotten it. Dangerous enough to make me believe in love again. Outside, an owl called across the darkness. The party had finally wound down, guests making their way home with full stomachs and light hearts. Tomorrow would bring normal life again, chores and challenges, the daily work of building a life together. But tonight was for them, for promises kept and new ones made, for the miracle of two broken people creating something whole. Spring had fully claimed the mountain now, green spreading like hope across the harsh landscape. The hawthorn bloomed white and sweet, dropping petals like blessings on the ground below. And in the cabin where bread had been offered and a family born, two hearts beat as one, writing their own story of redemption and joy. Come morning, Margot would begin her first painting, the view from their porch, mountains rising purple and mighty against the dawn. Sawyer would work on the new pasture fence, planning for the horses they'd raise. Life would unfold in its ordinary glory. But that's tomorrow's story. Tonight ended as all the best stories do, with love victorious, justice served, and hope planted deep as prairie grass in the good earth of home. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, bearing witness to another small human triumph over darkness. And if the wind through the mountains sounded like applause, perhaps it was, perhaps the very land celebrated when love won, when courage stood firm, when strangers became family and a house became a home. The end. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please leave a comment and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this Wild West love story, please subscribe to Wild West Night, hit that like button, and don't forget to click the hype button to help more people discover these tales of courage and romance from the American frontier.